In the endless dark between dying stars, something ancient stirred, a pressure beneath the fabric of the materium, subtle at first, like the slow intake of a breath before a scream. The void had always known death. It fed on it, carried the whispers of it across the silence between worlds. But this was different. This was directional, intentional. It was as if the universe itself had been waiting for this moment. For the moment when the veil between the living and the dead would rupture like a wound upon reality. It began over the shattered husk of Cadia. The ruins drifted still, a broken monument to defiance. Its ghosts had long since been claimed by the warp, their screams lost in eternity's static. But on this night, if such a concept could exist in the lightless gulf, they began to move again. The stars dimmed. Warp storms shuddered, their colors bleeding to black. And through that bleeding dark, a fissure opened. It was not a tear of energy, but of will. The veil convulsed as something vast and patient forced its way through. Souls poured out, drifting like embers from an unseen pyre, warriors, priests, sinners, martyrs. They came in their millions, silent and weightless, their armor shattered, their banners nothing but dust. The void trembled beneath their passing. They were not rising, they were summoned. From the abyss below, a lightless glow began to form, an outline against the infinite dark. A shape vast beyond mortal scale, taking form from the matter of grief and memory. Black stone condensed from shadow, shaped by a will older than the warp, forged by the echoes of 1,000 underworlds forgotten. Pillars rose from the nothingness, colossal monoliths carved with symbols that burned with ancient purpose. The sound of it was a choir of the damned, low and resonant, echoing across the galaxy's bones. Then the throne emerged. Obsidian and colossal, wrought from the screams of the fallen, it anchored itself between worlds. Its surface pulsed like cooled magma, each vein glowing faintly red, the heartbeat of a god returning to claim dominion. Upon it something sat, something that had waited beyond measure, patient as decay. A crown of iron rested upon a brow cut from shadow, and eyes like dying suns watched the procession of lost souls. The Lord of the Underworld had arrived. Hades did not come with legions. He did not come with fire or conquest or the hollow words of salvation. He came as balance, inevitable, absolute, unbending. The galaxy's chaos had become an affront to order itself. Souls were trapped, denied passage, consumed by the warp's madness. Life had grown unchecked, swollen with sin and blasphemy until death no longer had meaning. And so Hades rose not to destroy but to reclaim. The first world to feel his presence was Armageddon. Under its burning skies, orcs and men tore each other apart in a tide of endless slaughter. The ground was so thick with blood that the air itself choked on iron. But then, as the 12th moon rose, a shadow passed over the planet that was not cast by any sun. The winds died. The fire froze in midair. From the skies descended tendrils of black mist that did not burn or freeze or crush, they judged. Each breath of it whispered with countless voices, each name spoken once, then gone. Warriors fell to their knees, not from pain but from weight, the unbearable gravity of being seen by something that remembered what the galaxy had forgotten, that death was sacred. Astartes, those sons of the emperor, watched their fallen brothers rise. Their armor no longer bore heraldry or color, only the sheen of shadow and memory. Their eyes were empty, calm, resolved, freed from fury. They turned not to fight but to march toward the horizon where the air shimmered with faint red light. The underworld's call had begun. Across the void, astropaths screamed as they glimpsed what lay beyond that light. Worlds entire could see it through the fractures of the warp. An endless plain of obsidian dust stretching into infinity, lit by the glow of molten rivers and drifting constellations of the dead. It was not hell, nor heaven, nor warp. It was something older, the root of all endings. In Terra's deepest vaults, the Adeptus Custodes felt it too. For a moment, even the Emperor's golden radiance flickered, his throne casting longer shadows than before. A hum passed through the imperial palace, low and mournful, vibrating in the bones of all who guarded it. One custodian whispered an old word from a forgotten age, Thanatos. But it was not the name of death they should have feared. It was the authority behind it. Ships across the segmentum solar lost power as a pulse of black energy rippled through the void, extinguishing lights, silencing Vox transmissions, freezing machine spirits in reverence. Only one thing was heard through the static, a whisper that echoed across every channel, every mind, every dream. The debt of souls is unpaid. Then silence. The galaxy, vast and teeming with life, felt suddenly hollow. From forge worlds to shrine worlds, from hive spires to void citadels, the same phenomena occurred. Candles dimmed, shadows deepened, and whispers rose in the air, faint as breath on glass. The priests called it heresy. The Inquisition called it impossible. But the dead called it home. As the throne of obsidian settled between the materium and the warp, the balance shifted. Demons shuddered as their feasts were interrupted. The warp itself recoiled, its chaotic essence shrinking back from the gravity of an order it could not comprehend. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy trembled not at the rise of chaos, nor at the wars of men, but at something infinitely older and quieter. The Lord of the Underworld had found the galaxy wanting, and he had come to claim his due. Where the warp once screamed, now it wept. Its storms no longer roared with laughter and madness, but with confusion, the primal fear of something that predated its birth. The sea of souls, that infinite maelstrom of thought and agony, had begun to congeal. Where color once burned and flickered like oil fire, darkness now gathered, a darkness not of void but of intent. Rivers began to form. They did not flow as water does, nor burn as warpfare burns. They slithered across dimensions, threading through the immaterial like veins of shadow filled with the essence of memory. Souls that had wandered for millennia, lost warriors, priests, children of fallen worlds, were pulled into the current. They moved not by will, but by recognition. Each fragment of existence knew the pull of the underworld, the resonance of finality. On the edges of the Eye of Terror, demons gathered in confusion. The great warp beasts, shrieking spawn of chaos, clawed at the black tide, their fangs sinking into incorporeal current only to recoil as their flesh burned with divine equilibrium. Where they had devoured the dead for eons, now they starved. A keeper of secrets stood upon a cliff of shattered souls and watched its prey slip away. Its talons dug into the mist as it screamed in 1,000 voices, but the river only whispered back, "Judgment." Then it was gone, dissolved by its own hunger, erased not in pain but in understanding, the punishment of knowing its time had ended. Across the warp, the chaos god stirred. Khorne roared first, his throne of skulls trembling as the flow of bloodless souls diminished. The Lord of War, who fed on death without honor, now found his feasts barren. His voice, a sound like colliding worlds, boomed through the warp's void. "Who dares weigh my slain? Who judges the blood I claim?" But none answered. Slaanesh felt the silence differently. The god of excess, of endless sensation, shuddered as the music of suffering dulled to a single, low hum. No more mortal despair to savor, no ecstatic terror to drink. The shadows flowed past their realm without interest. Souls were no longer tempted, they were taken. Nurgle's gardens wilted. His children of rot tried to embrace the rivers to feed upon their sorrow, but the darkness devoured decay itself. Life and death, once twisted together by his diseased love, were now unbound. His laughter faltered. And Tzinch, the eternal schemer, watched in silence. For in the flow of these rivers he saw something not even he could alter: inevitability. He saw threads of destiny converging, leading to a name long erased from mortal archives: Hades. Within the materium, the consequences grew apocalyptic. Planets once alive with conflict fell quiet. Entire hive cities woke to find the air colder, thinner, the shadows unnaturally deep. On Krieg, where generations of men had been born to die, the rivers of shadow appeared above the trenches like auroras of black light. Soldiers raised their heads from mud and blood as spectral streams coiled through the skis, carrying away the ghosts of the countless Krieg dead. The living watched in silence, their helmets dripping with rain and awe. For once there was no fear, only recognition. "They are going home," murmured one officer through his mask before falling to his knees. Across the void, the Adeptus Mechanicus struggled to comprehend the phenomenon. Sensors registered impossible data, negative entropy, reverse energy flux, reality folding inward upon itself. Tech priests declared it divine interference, a subroutine of death's machine god counterpart. Yet even their faith trembled when the rivers swept across forged worlds, extinguishing the flicker of corrupted machine spirits that had strayed too close to demonhood. The rivers did not destroy, they cleansed. Each soul touched by the current was stripped of its madness, its corruption, its false memory, leaving only essence, pure and unbound. The current bore them away through dimensions unseen, toward the throne that now rested at the edge of all things. There Hades sat unmoved, his expression unreadable, his gaze upon the flow. He was not cruel nor merciful. He was necessity incarnate. In the quiet of that new order, something miraculous and terrible occurred. Planets fell silent, not conquered, but emptied. Armies vanished mid-war. The fields of Armageddon were found abandoned, the trenches littered not with corpses but with armor husks, as if their owners had simply stepped out of existence. The orcs roared in confusion, their war chants breaking into frightened silence as their fallen ceased to rise. Chaos cultists prayed to their false gods, only to find their words muffled, their visions blank. Inquisitors called for purges, declaring the phenomenon a warp plague. But no weapon, no exterminatus, no psychic ward could stem the rivers. Wherever death had taken root, the flow followed, as though death itself were correcting a debt long unpaid. Across Segmentum Pacificus, a cathedral world known as Veneris Prime recorded the phenomenon in its liturgical archives. Pilgrims knelt beneath skies dark as obsidian, watching as streams of lightless fire cascaded from the heavens. The High Confessor spoke only once before vanishing in the black wind. "The God of the dead has come to count what we have squandered." The underworld of mankind had awakened. In orbit above the dead world of Istvan, an Imperial Navy crew saw it clearly. The shadow that passed over their viewport was not a ship, nor a storm. It was a silhouette vast, humanoid, cloaked in darkness, its crown of iron glinting with the faint red of molten judgment. Around it, the rivers converged like tributaries feeding a sea. "Emperor, protect us," whispered the captain. But the Emperor could not answer, not this time. Hades walked among the stars now, his presence bending both warp and reality. The galaxy trembled as his dominion spread, silent, patient, inevitable. The warp recoiled, chaos faltered, the living held their breath. And from that moment onward, death itself ceased to be an escape. It had become a destination. Beneath the shattered cathedrals of a million worlds, the candles of devotion guttered and died. Smoke curled from the altars like the final breath of the faithful. The air, once heavy with incense and prayer, grew still, thick with the scent of burned wax and iron. For centuries, the Imperium had taught that faith could defy death, that the Emperor's light alone shielded mankind from damnation. But as the black fire swept through the sanctums, even the most zealous could no longer deny it. Something older than faith had entered the galaxy. It began on Ophelia VII, the ecclesiarchal fortress world whose towers of gold and ivory had never known shadow. There, in the Basilica of St. Catherine's Rest, the Adepta Sororitas stood vigil, their bolters resting across their armored chests as hymns thundered through the vaulted halls. But when the storm came, it did not roar. It whispered. The sisters looked up to see the stained glass tremble not from wind but from pressure. Shapes rippled behind the sacred windows, bending light into impossible geometries. A sister superior crossed herself with trembling fingers, whispering the Emperor's name. Yet when the glass shattered inward, the sound was not of destruction, but of release, a sigh, as though the very walls had exhaled the burden of centuries. Black fire rolled across the floor. It burned without smoke or heat, gliding like liquid night. Where it passed, relics turned to ash, purity seals unraveled, and statues wept molten tears. One by one, the sisters fell to their knees, not screaming, not resisting, but weeping. For in that fire they saw visions. Every battle fought, every sinner purged, every heretic burned, and every innocent caught in between. The weight of all those deaths pressed upon their souls, not as punishment, but as reckoning. "Emperor, preserve us," murmured one novice, her voice trembling. But the echo that answered was not his. It was the sound of eternity judging itself. Across the galaxy, similar scenes unfolded. Shrine worlds ignited in black luminescence. The cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, structures so vast they spanned continents, crumbled from within as their foundations turned to dust. The warp-touched prophets who once claimed divine visions now fell silent, their eyes burned clean of illusion. The psychic choir of humanity dimmed, its endless noise stilled by the gravity of something far greater. The Adeptus Ministorum called for exorcisms, for purges, for penance without end. But there was nothing left to purge. For the first time, faith itself trembled not under heresy, but under truth. On Terra, in the endless halls of the imperial palace, the Adeptus Custodes felt the change like a chill through their golden armor. The Emperor's light, that eternal blaze that had burned since the day his body was enthroned, flickered. Just once, but once was enough. At the heart of the Sanctum Imperialis, the Astronomicon pulsed weakly, its blinding beacon dimmed to a cold blue flame. Psychers screamed and dropped dead at their stations, their souls pulled backward through unseen hands. The master of the Astronomicon, a relic kept alive by tubes and faith, raised his hollow eyes toward the dimming light. "It remembers us," he whispered. "The dark below remembers." Within the shadow of the throne, 1,000 mechanical prayers stuttered and fell silent. The golden machinery that sustained the Emperor hummed in low, mournful rhythm. Even the corpse god's eternal light seemed to hesitate, as though straining against something beyond even his dominion. And deep beneath the palace, in vaults sealed since the Great Crusade, something ancient stirred. Custodians and tech priests watched in terror as cracks spidered through the blackstone floors. From those fractures seeped tendrils of darkness, swirling like smoke yet heavy as oil. A faint voice, neither living nor dead, whispered through the chamber. "All debts come due." It was not a threat, it was law. Across the stars, every saint, every martyr, every relic that had once radiated the Emperor's grace began to fade. Icons bled shadow. Tombs shuddered as the bones within turned to dust. The faithful called it blasphemy, but in the quiet after each collapse they heard something else, the low tolling of a distant bell, not of doom but of completion. In a monastery adrift above the planet Hydrafer, the last confessor of the Order of the Torch lit a single candle. His eyes, hollow yet unafraid, gazed into the black horizon beyond the viewport. Around him, the corpses of his brothers lay at peace, untouched by decay. The void beyond shimmered faintly, and through it drifted a tide of souls, endless, silent, serene. "They go to him," the confessor whispered, "to the judge." The candle flickered, its flame splitting into two, one gold, one black. Then it vanished. For the first time since the birth of the Imperium, the spiritual weight of mankind shifted. The Emperor's dominion over death, unspoken but assumed, had been challenged, not by chaos, not by rebellion, but by the rightful claim of the underworld. Every saint and sinner trembled as Hades weighed the balance of eternity. On worlds long dead, the statues of the Emperor cracked, not from violence, but from the quiet movement of unseen forces. Molten tears dripped from stone faces, cooling into black glass. Even the most devoted of priests felt the chill of that truth, that death had not been vanquished by mankind's God, merely delayed. And in the deepest chambers of the palace, where the Emperor's golden light dimmed to a pallid hue, the shadow finally reached the throne itself. The golden aura faltered. The machinery screamed. Servo skulls sparked and fell to the floor as the room filled with a darkness so complete that even the psychic luminescence of the Emperor's being was momentarily drowned. The light returned but weaker. For a heartbeat that echoed across eternity, the galaxy felt something it had not known since before the birth of man: doubt. The Emperor's throne flickered, its radiance cut by a shadow from below, and somewhere in the black between worlds, a god who had ruled death since time immemorial opened his constant hum of the galaxy, a rhythm older than faith, older than the Imperium itself. It thundered from the mouths of guns and the roars of dying suns. But now even war began to falter. Where armies clashed, silence crept between the bolter fire. Where heroes fell, no cries followed. The void between heartbeats grew longer, deeper, colder, until the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. It began in the segmentum obscurus, upon the blasted plains of Vrax. Once a world of unending siege, it had become a tomb of iron and regret. The Red Scorpions and the Death Guard were locked in slaughter, their armor painted in ash and gore. Above the trenches, black rain fell in sheets, streaking across the corpses like ink bleeding through parchment. Then, without warning, the rain stopped. A low vibration passed through the air, so deep it was felt rather than heard. The living froze, weapons trembling in their grip. The dead, thousands of them, began to stir, not as demons nor as puppets of sorcery, but as something altogether different. Their eyes ignited, faintly blue like the dying glow of plasma coils. Astartes' armor groaned as its occupants rose once more, their ceramite fractured and shadowed, the sigils of their chapters erased. Their steps were silent, their presence heavy. No breath fogged their lenses, no heat emanated from their forms. The living stepped back, unsure whether to fire or kneel. A Red Scorpion sergeant approached one of the risen, a brother he had seen fall only minutes before, torn open by a demon's claw. "Brother," he whispered through his vox. The figure turned its head, slow and deliberate. The voice that came from its helm was low, resonant, and utterly calm. "The debt is paid." Then it moved past him, blade drawn, not toward friend or foe, but toward the chaos-spawned abomination still writhing across the field. Its strike was perfect, unerring, final. Where the weapon passed, the demon did not die, it simply ceased. No scream, no resistance, no dispersal to the warp. It was as though existence itself had withdrawn its permission. Within minutes, the battlefield was transformed. The risen dead, warriors from both sides, fought side by side in total silence. The living watched, breathless, as the warp creatures were erased one by one, their forms collapsing into motes of blue flame that drifted upward like souls returning home. When it was done, the spectral legion stood in formation amid the ruin. 100,000 warriors, motionless beneath the burning skis. Then, as one, they turned toward the horizon, toward a faint, distant glow that shimmered like the reflection of a star upon black water. That light was Hades. Reports flooded the Vox across the Imperium. Entire campaigns fell quiet overnight. On Calth, the Ultramarines found their fallen brothers standing again at the gates of the void, armor dull, eyes aflame with cerulean fire. On Armageddon, Orc warlords screamed in terror as their dead enemies rose without hatred or roar, advancing with the calm inevitability of the tide. The Mechanicus called it the Obsidian Reclamation. The Ecclesiarchy called it heresy incarnate, but the Inquisition knew better. They called it judgment. Inquisitor Salis Mar, aboard her vessel Lament of Iron, watched from orbit as one such transformation unfolded below. Her interrogator whispered prayers under his breath. "What do we do?" he asked, voice cracking through the vox. "We watch," Mar replied, eyes unblinking. "You do not command death, you do not bargain with it, you simply pay your due." The feed showed legions of spectral Astartes marching across the wastes, thousands upon thousands of them, moving in perfect silence. Their armor reflected no light. Their banners bore no sigils. Upon their pauldrons, symbols had appeared, obsidian runes inscribed in an ancient tongue no mortal record had ever kept. The letters glowed faintly red, like metal cooling after the forge. The script the Mechanicus would later discover, translated to one phrase: bound by debt eternal. Their loyalty was no longer to emperor or chaos, to chapter or primarch. Their oath had been rewritten in the currency of souls. Each was a record of debt settled, a name struck from the ledger of life and death. In orbit around Terra, the Grey Knights gathered in council. The prognosticars, those psychic oracles who watched the tides of the warp, were blind. The currents had vanished. No demonic surge, no psychic tremor, no omen remained. Only a single constant pulse, a rhythm like the beating of a colossal heart. Whose power rivals the warp itself? One knight asked. Grand Master Valinor, his silver armor dull beneath the dimming Astronomicon, answered without hesitation. Not power, authority. Across the galaxy, Hades' legions marched, not to conquer but to collect. Their arrival was marked by stillness, by the faint ringing of a single chime that echoed across the void before every engagement. They spoke little, if at all. Some claimed to hear whispers from them in dreams, voices calm and grave, promising not vengeance but closure. On one dying world in the halo stars, a chaos warband made its last stand. The skies above it broke open in auroras of black flame. The underworld's warriors descended silent, spectral, and endless. When it was over, nothing remained. Not corpses, not ruins, not echoes. Only dust and the faint outline of footprints leading toward the void. Each step of those warriors thundered across the stars. The sound carried through the warp like the tolling of a final judgment. Even the chaos gods listened. For every step, a soul was reclaimed. Every march, a sin erased. And with each legion that joined his cause, the domain of Hades grew, not as empire but as equilibrium. In the end, it was not war that defined mankind's fate, nor faith, nor fury. It was the quiet inevitability of the underworld's law. The dead would march until the living remembered what they had forgotten, that death is not defeat, but the price of existence. The warp had always been chaos incarnate, an ocean of thought and madness, where gods were born from emotion and reality bent to the will of the deranged. It howled, it burned, it dreamed in infinite colors. But now the sea of souls screamed in fear. At first it was subtle. The currents grew sluggish, the storms ceased to churn, and the demons, creatures of hunger and will, began to whisper among themselves. The oldest of them, horrors that had known the taste of 10,000 ages, trembled as the first shadow cut across the Empyrean horizon. It was not a ship, nor a god, nor a storm. It was absence. An emptiness that devoured not flesh nor soul, but meaning. The scream that followed was cosmic. The warp convulsed, twisting upon itself like a living thing trying to flee its own skin. Worlds of madness imploded. Their endless architecture of emotion collapsing into dust. Where rivers of blood once flowed to Khorne's throne, there now trickled black rivulets of stillness. Where Slaanesh's palaces shimmered in obscene beauty, now stood only fractured mirrors reflecting void. The first to act was Khorne. The blood god rose from his brass citadel, his molten eyes blazing with fury. The skulls of 10 billion victims rattled beneath his tread as he lifted his axe, cleaving the void itself. His roar shook the stars. Who dares unmake my dominion? Who dares claim what is mine? His challenge rolled across the warp, and the echo that answered was a whisper, deep, resonant, and absolute. You mistake dominion for debt. And then silence. One by one, the brazen rivers froze mid-flow, their blood congealing into obsidian. Khorne's axe fell upon the ground not from defeat, but from futility. For his power, born of rage and death, could find no purchase in a universe where death had been reclaimed by its origin. Slaanesh watched next, reclining upon their throne of sensation, as the revelers below grew still. The pleasures of the damned turned to dust upon their tongues. The colors faded from the silk of desire. Even the god's perfect face dimmed, its features uncertain, as if beauty itself questioned its right to exist. Slaanesh smiled faintly, sensing the oncoming end, and whispered to the dark, "Will you judge me, too, Lord of Finality?" No answer came, only the flicker of a scythe's reflection upon the curve of the god's lips, then nothing. Nurgle, the grandfather of decay, laughed when he first felt the shadow. His garden trembled but did not die. Flowers of rot opened in defiance, releasing clouds of joyous pestilence. "Ah, at last," he crooned. "My dear Hades, come, let us embrace, I have missed you." But when the rivers of shadow reached him, they did not embrace. They passed through. His children withered not in pain but in peace. No cough, no wheeze, no plague, only stillness. For the god of decay was not slain, he was rendered unnecessary. And finally, Tzint, the changer of ways, stood upon a tower of screaming colors and smiled. His laughter echoed like a storm of glass. "So it comes at last," he whispered. "The convergence I foresaw but could never divert, the unmaking of the unmade." He spread his wings of 1,000 eyes and gazed upon the scythe's shadow as it fell across the warp. In every reflection, he saw every plan, every scheme, every lie unraveling. For no scheme can survive judgment. No deceit can outlive truth. The warp itself shuddered. Hades did not stride into it as a conqueror but as a correction. His scythe was not a weapon but a ledger, a boundary etched in divine iron. Where it passed, the screaming ceased. The realms of chaos, unbound since the dawn of sentience, began to fold. Not destroyed, not erased, measured. The scythe cut through the heart of unreality, and with each swing, a universe was brought to balance. Empires built on sin and heresy collapsed, their banners dissolving into ash. The screams of heretics, sorcerers, and demons alike filled the void, not with terror but with recognition. They understood now that their immortality had never been life, merely delay. And somewhere far beyond the warp's dying storms, mortals felt it too. On Terra, psychers cried out in unison, their minds burning with visions of black suns and rivers of silver flame. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica fell silent. Navigators found their third eyes darkened. The warp had become still. Across the void, battlefields froze in eerie calm. Bolters fell silent mid-fire. Demon engines ceased to move, their infernal sparks extinguished. Even Titans, those god machines of the Mechanicus, halted mid-step as their machine spirits bowed in unseen reverence. Everywhere the same whisper echoed, soft as breath against glass. "Order returns." Then came the severing. A lightless blade carved across the galaxy, not through matter, but through the metaphysical fabric that tethered life to chaos. Worlds shuddered as reality snapped into focus, clearer, colder. Warp rifts sealed, their howling mouths closing like wounds sutured by the hand of a god. The laughter of Slaanesh died, the roars of Khorne ceased, Nurgle's chuckles faded into sighs, even Tzint's eternal muttering went silent. For the first time since their birth, the Chaos gods listened. And what they heard was not wrath, nor condemnation but finality. Hades' voice swept across their dying realms, vast and ancient. "You were born from imbalance, from the noise of mortals lost in their own chaos. You fed upon their defiance, their sorrow, their sins. That time is over, the scales have been weighed, the debt is closed." Then came silence, true silence. The warp no longer screamed. It no longer dreamed. Its colors dulled to gray, then to black, then to nothing. What remained was peace, vast and terrifying. Across the galaxy, mortals stood beneath quiet skies. For a fleeting moment, no psychic storm raged, no demon howled, no emperor's light flickered. Only the stars, cold, distant, unbroken, watched as the universe held its breath. And in that breathless stillness, the galaxy knew silence, pure, eternal silence. A silence not of death, but of completion. The silence endured, vast, unbroken, infinite. It spread across the galaxy like an eclipse that no dawn could follow. Worlds long torn by war lay still beneath skies the color of morning. The fires of conflict, which had burned for millennia, guttered into smoke. And in the heart of that endless quiet, something immense began to move. From the void between stars, the underworld unfolded. It did not arrive. It had always been there, hidden beneath the skin of reality, waiting for the moment when the universe would grow weary of its own noise. Now, it revealed itself like the turning of a great wheel. Black spires rose from the galactic plain, not built but remembered into existence. They were forged from the armor of the fallen, the bones of forgotten champions, and the oaths of warriors who had died with their faith unfulfilled. Their surfaces reflected no light, only the pale glow of the souls drifting toward them, billions upon billions of them, drawn by a pull older than gravity. They came from every corner of the cosmos. Imperial guardsmen whose blood still stained the trenches of dead moons, Astartes whose gene seed had turned to ash within their shattered armor, Eldar spirits shimmering like faint constellations, Orc warlords bellowing even in spectral form, and silent Necrons whose dim souls, long thought lost, flickered once more as they were claimed by inevitability. They moved together, a vast, endless migration of the dead, drawn toward the black heart of existence. There, beneath a sky of ash and embers, stood the gates of the underworld, titanic monoliths forged from the remnants of the galaxy's wars. The bones of titans formed their pillars, the melted hulls of starships their archway. Upon their surface was written the history of death itself, every name, every battle, every silence that had ever followed a scream. And upon the highest step, enthroned in shadow and flame, sat Hades. He did not wear a crown, nor wield his scythe as a weapon. It rested beside him, tall as a mountain, its blade dark as the void, still humming faintly from the severing of the warp. His throne was carved from obsidian so pure it reflected the souls approaching him not as they had been, but as they were meant to be. Warriors stripped of sin, leaders freed of pride, monsters unmasked as the broken mortals they once were. The Lord of the underworld watched in silence as the dead gathered before him. Above, the heavens no longer burned. The stars shone with the pale, distant light of acceptance. The warp, now sealed, lay beyond reach, a dead ocean beneath an unbroken sky. In its place flowed rivers of shadow and silver flame, winding across the void like veins of creation reborn. They carried the souls of 10,000 wars toward their final rest. Each step of that procession resounded like thunder in the deep places of reality. The echoes reached even Terra, where the Emperor's light, though dimmed, flickered faintly in acknowledgement. His immortal shell, seated upon the golden throne, stirred a tremor of impossible recognition. For even he, who had defied gods and time, understood what now unfolded. Death had come not as an enemy, but as equilibrium. The Adeptus Custodes knelt in the halls of the palace, their golden armor dulled to bronze beneath the weight of that unseen presence. The ecclesiarchs ceased their chants, their hymns caught in their throats. For the first time in the history of mankind, no prayers rose to the heavens, not because faith had died, but because there was no need for petition. The divine had already answered. Across the galaxy, the same silence reigned. On Macragge, the Ultramarines' fortress monastery stood empty, its halls echoing only with the whispers of memory. Gilliman himself, half-living relic of a dead age, gazed from his sanctum upon the stars and saw their quiet. He felt the weight of judgment, not wrath, not vengeance, but the cold mercy of completion. On Cadia's ruins, where ghosts of shattered continents drifted through the void, spectral soldiers marched once more, not to war but to peace. Their boots made no sound, their eyes no longer burned with defiance. They followed the call, the same pull that drew all souls toward the gates of Hades. Even the Xenos races, scattered and dying, felt the same gravitation. The Eldar, once cursed to be devoured by she who thirsts, now found freedom in death. Their spirit stones pulsed one final time and went dark, their essence carried to the underworld's river by unseen hands. The orcs, whose joy was in battle eternal, rumbled laughter as they faded, believing they had found one last glorious fight, unaware they marched into rest. The galaxy itself had become the underworld, a cathedral of endings. The black gates opened wider and Hades stood. His presence eclipsed the stars, not in fury, but in calm dominion. His gaze swept across the multitude of the dead, and they stilled, a billion silent souls awaiting their judgment. "You have fought," he said, his voice resonating through the cosmos like a low, eternal drum. "You have conquered. You have sinned and prayed and burned. But now you are seen. Your battles end not in glory, nor in damnation, but in balance." The words did not echo, they settled. The souls bowed as one, and the rivers of shadow quickened their flow. From their merging, new stars began to form, not of fire but of memory. Each a testament, each a story, each a light to mark the passage of what was once chaos into order. And somewhere beneath the veil of that quiet creation, the scythe hummed once more, not as a weapon, but as a song. The song of endings fulfilled and beginnings that would never be written. Hades looked upon his kingdom, upon a galaxy finally at rest. No demon stirred. No god whispered. The warp lay still, the emperor silent, the stars serene. All debts had been paid. All echoes had been gathered. And in that silence, vast and sacred, the Lord of the Dead smiled. For at last the galaxy had found peace, not in victory, nor in life, but in the only truth that had ever been